Good morning. This is 1 in 36, a presentation from Anderson Center for Autism, celebrating their centennial in 2024. 1 in 36 is a weekly show devoted to autism spectrum disorder.
Good morning and welcome to 1 in 36, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, Chief Development Officer at Anderson Center for Autism, and I'm speaking today with Dr. Robert Domingo. He's an Associate Professor of Communication Sciences and Disorders at Long Island University Post Campus. And Dr. Domingo, or Robert, however you'd like me to refer to you, thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure, and refer to me as Bob, if you would.
I'd be happy to, Bob. That sounds great.
It always comes up as Robert, and I normally change it, but I just didn't. I was drinking coffee at the time, so
not a problem. You're never going to hear anything from me when coffee is the culprit.
There you go.
Yes, fellow coffee drinkers. So,
right.
So Bob, if you would tell us a little bit, start maybe with a little bit about your background.
Sure. Okay. I'd be happy to. So I'm a speech language pathologist. I've been one since 1977. So that's 47 years now. My first job was working in Massachusetts at a state-run facility for the mentally retarded, which is what they were referred to back in the late 70s. A residential school similar to Willowbrook State School on Staten Island that has a lot of fame and notoriety, if you will, based on, what kind of conditions were present at the time. So I guess the reason I bring that up is because my entire professional career has been in working with people with developmental disabilities. And I didn't know much about autism at the time, and I'm certain that if I were to go back there now, I would see that quite a lot of the men who I was in charge of working with in their dormitory were indeed on the spectrum. Be that as it may, throughout my career, I've been working with the DD population. And so, in my professional practice, and most recently in working in the area of improvisation, I have come to learn more things about the population and, of course, about myself. So throughout my career, I've worked in many kinds of facilities. I've worked in schools. I've worked in clinical practice. I've had my own private practice. And so, and even though I say I worked mostly with persons with developmental disabilities, of course, I worked with a whole variety of children through adults, the whole lifespan, people having difficulties with communication. Also, for 20 years, I worked in a hospital setting. So I worked in the area of dysphagia treatment in people with swallowing disorders. And interestingly, even in that setting, I shouldn't say even, but in that setting, I also became known as the SLP who would work with the difficult to test population. And who were they? The ones who were nonverbal.
Yeah, those tests are not really designed for people who
No, not at all. Not only are you afraid of people in white coats, but now they're trying to feed you stuff that doesn't taste good.
Yeah.
So, but I became known as that guy, and I used to work with a lot of the ACLD and AHRC and all of the other alphabet soup agencies that would come to our facility in Nassau County. And so you could say that I've always had it in my mind and in my heart to work with this population. Now I'm a grandpa, and two of my grandchildren are on the spectrum. One is nonverbal, and uses communication board. He's 8, and my granddaughter is 16, going on 17, and she's a high functioning autism, very intelligent, and she's off on her way to college. So, but as far as the theatrical part is concerned, I started doing theater as a theater nerd in high school, and it continued throughout college, and then into my life after college. I met my wife doing a show. We co-founded a theater group in our church, which was around for about 30 years, and I've always acted, and I've sung, and I've directed. And I've always been interested in the creative process. So one day, as fate would have it, I was attending the American Speech and Hearing Association annual convention in Boston, Massachusetts, and it was 8:00 in the morning. And I happened upon this lecture that was being given by Dr. Jim Ansaldo from Indiana University and by Dr. Krista Wilkinson from Penn State, both of whom have used improv in working with people with developmental disabilities, or specifically autism and Down syndrome. And I was just blown away. I attended this lecture. I listened to everything they had to say. I played all the games that they were playing. And I guess you could say that all of a sudden I came to a realization that I know these two things. I know speech and I know language, but I know theater. Mm-hmm. Shortly after that I invited Jim Ansaldo to come and do a day of study at LIU, where we have continuing ed program. And he came in. I was just, fascinated and hooked. And it was shortly after that I started. This was in 2019. It was shortly in 2019 that I started running my own classes. Mm-hmm. And so it began, with an in-person class of about 6 individuals who are on the spectrum. And I had some graduate students attending it as well. And it's just grown from that point. And so now I have in-person and online classes. And I try to incorporate my graduate students whenever I can. And the word has gotten out to some of my colleagues at the university who are in special ed. One individual is in physical therapy, but she has a background in improvisation. And so I've had professional people. I've had alumni. I've had a variety of different people coming in and attending these classes. And it's been awesome. It's been like a lot of fun. And it doesn't feel like work. It's like you're just having a good time working with individuals, having them express themselves in more than just the verbal way. I think that's the key to what I do is like I take speech and language, which for the most part, we talk about verbal communication, but then you realize that for the population we're talking about, sometimes their ability to communicate verbally is limited. And so now try to consider the other ways that people communicate. They communicate vocally with the sounds that they make. They communicate facially with their expressions, or gesturally with the way they move their hands, or physically by the way they move their bodies. And so my approach to using improv taps into all of those other ways of expression, so that a person can improve their social language, not only understanding social cues that they see in the people around them, and sometimes seeing a person with a certain facial expression who doesn't understand, they might not get why that person is suddenly angry with them. And so we talk about, receptively understanding social cues, and then expressively, if you can't say it, act it out. And that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, so first of all, you're also a great storyteller. I'm going to add that. You're just one of those people that I could listen to, for hours. I think just because it really
tell that to my students.
I will. I would like you to play that for your students. Say, I said, listen to Bob.
Cool.
Really, really fascinating. But also, I think the reason why is because your passion for what you're doing and your comfort with it really comes through. Yeah. So I feel like I want to be, immediately in those classes. And I would venture to guess it's quite a popular class.
It is.
One question just for clarification before we get into the rest of the discussion. The classes that you offer at LIU are for university students to learn how to do what you're doing, or for people, autistic people and people with other speech and language challenges to come and learn with you? Is it a combination of both, or are you teaching other people how to do what you're doing now?
It is actually both, though I wouldn't have been able to say that maybe like about 2 months ago.
Okay.
What I mean is that at about 2 months ago, I got approval to teach a liberal arts class starting this fall. So in September, I will indeed be teaching my undergraduate students in the methodology. Okay.
Okay.
Prior to that, it's all been like these sessions that I've run. We would have to recruit the population through connections, through people that I know, through colleagues, and then through word of mouth. I've done my share of lectures. I've done poster sessions, and people hear about what we do. But to answer your questions from before, yes, now it's actually both. I will be teaching the class starting in the fall. I will continue to run my improv groups, both online and in person. And also moving into the future, I am in the middle of writing a workbook having to do with this, so that people will be able to see where I've come from in terms of the genesis of the program, how how it all came together in my mind. And I'm writing out all of the different games and activities with, step-by-step instruction. So a person, who might be afraid of doing what we call improv might feel less afraid. And we deal with that too, because a lot of people would say, oh, I can't do improv. I'm not creative.
Sure.
I can't think on my feet. I don't know what to say. So we address all of those concerns that, let's say, a teacher or a therapist might have. That's the target population I'm shooting for, teachers and therapists. I'd like to start a teacher training program. It's like a week-long summer program.
I think that, to me, just knowing, especially obviously what we do here at Anderson and who we serve, but in the broader population as well. I think you're covering so many things, just the general sort of addressing of some people's automatic sense of, I would never get up on stage and do something that I'm unprepared for. It's hard enough to do something scripted, but something unscripted is even harder. So you're kind of addressing those natural fears and worries that somebody might have in participating. But also you're taking this thing called improv, which I think the vast majority of people listening to this are going to automatically go to, certain shows on TV, things they've seen, things they've heard, famous actors started in improv classes and things like that. It's all verbal. It's all vocal. It's all about verbal communication.
But have you ever seen those TV shows? Have you ever seen Whose Line?
Well, yes, but you're taking what really is, which it's so gestural. It's so much facial expression. It's so much of the nonverbal,
completely true,
and non-vocal, but you're zeroing in on that aspect, which I think is really phenomenal. And then, of course, applying it in a practical sense. With people who historically may have been just completely left out of opportunities like this because just the people facilitating them weren't necessarily thinking it would make any sense. So I love all of that. We're going to have to take a short break, but when we come back, I want to get into some of the actual activities and games and the curriculum that you offer so people can get a sense of what it's like to be in that session with you. This is 1 in 36, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky. We'll be right back.
Somewhere there's a river rushing through the woods while someone rushes through their day. There's a mountain looking up at the sky while someone looks down at their phone. A trail waiting to be walked while someone waits for a latte. This world is full of somewheres waiting for someone just like you. So go see yours at 154 national forests and 20 grasslands. And to learn more, visit nationalforest.org. The National Forest Foundation. See your somewhere.
Retirement can be scary, but only if you're not prepared. That's why AARP created thisispretirement.org. Because unless you've already retired, you're in pretirement, and you still have time to plan. Learn about retirement savings options, potential tax breaks, and how you can build savings over time. Visit thisispretirement.org for free resources to help you customize your action plan and feel the retirement fear disappear. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
If I could be you.
And you could be me. For just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
And now, 1 in 36 continues on 100.7 WHUD. This is a weekly community affairs program presented by the Anderson Center for Autism.
Welcome back to 1 in 36, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky. I'm talking with Dr. Domingo, otherwise known as Bob. We're going to call you Bob for the rest of the show. Bob is an associate professor of communication sciences and disorders at Long Island University at the Post campus. And thank you, Bob, for such a comprehensive sort of background on yourself and your passions and your interests and your family and your professional career in the first half of the show. For this second part, I'd love for you to take us inside an example of one of your sessions. When I was preparing for this interview, one of the things that I read that you like to employ, and I'm going to fail on the name, but it's something sort of like, and then, or but then. Or
yes, and.
Yes, and much better than my poor attempts at that. So can you maybe just give us an example or tell us what that is? What kind of
Sure.
strategy is that and why do you employ that particular one in your sessions?
Great question. I'll answer that, and then I'll give you a synopsis of what a typical hour session looks like. But
Great.
yes, and is a principle of improvisation. Well, it's the principle upon which improvisation is based. With improvisation, a person says or does or demonstrates something, and it's off the cuff, it's of the moment, it's improvised. And so you never know what your partner in crime is going to express to you.
Mm-hmm.
And your job is to acknowledge or accept. You don't have to accept, which is what you think the word yes means. But yes can also mean, okay, like you acknowledge. All right. So there's always a form of agreement implicit in the word yes. Then with the second word, and, you now add something to it. Now it's your turn. We're taking turns in a conversation, and it keeps the interaction going. When you see a person who has difficulty with yes and we see that when we run yes and games in my hour session. The stories tend to stop. We do group storytelling. Once upon a time, blah blah blah. Yes, and then this thing happened. Blah blah blah. Yes, and then the next. Mm-hmm. But a person who has difficulty with yes and rules makes the story kind of come to a grinding halt. And I compare yes and group storytelling to conversations, actually.
Yes.
That's one of the keys I try to tie speech and language to improvisation. And I say that when you're doing an improvised scene, it's like having a conversation, but you want to keep it going. We all know people who you can't have a conversation with because they don't contribute to it. Those are the people who are not doing yes and. And then if you have a really cool conversation, you realize that you go back and forth, turn after turn, and you just keep the story going. It's more engaging. It's more communicative. You're picking up on all the social cues. You're giving off social cues, and it's communicative. And that's where we're coming from with this whole approach, A typical class starts with, warm up. And during warm up, it's like when, as individuals arrive, because not everybody gets there promptly at, let's say, 10 a.m. And as people arrive, and I've arranged the room in a semicircle, so people know how to grab a seat. And, as they arrive, they sit and we just have conversations. And, at a certain point, I might encourage, Adam to ask Anthony a question based on something Anthony just said. And I know my guys well enough to know that would be something that Adam would have an interest in, et cetera. And then we talk about eye contact and, make sure. And then if I say to Adam to ask Anthony a question, Adam looks straight in my face. And I said, no, talk to him, talk to Anthony. So you try to encourage that kind of proper, rule in having a conversation. But during warm-ups, we do something called icebreakers, too, as people are arriving. And sometimes we have brand new people joining that the other individuals don't know. So during icebreaker time, you might have different games. One of them is called Gather Round If. So I'll start. Gather round if you have a tattoo, or some such. And then I'll walk to one side of the room, and people who might have a tattoo walk over to my side. Or someone else says, gather round if you did your laundry this week, and everybody walks over to that side. And what that shows to the new person is that, I have things in common with
yes.
you.
Yes, and I love it. I'm going to say yes and to everything you say.
Yeah, there you go.
But I love that.
Another game we have during the icebreaker thing is called Two Truths and a Lie. And I'll say to you, Eliza, tell me three things about you, two that are true and one that is not. And then we'll listen to you. And then we'll have everybody go around and we'll say, Steve, what do you think is the lie? Or Bob, what do you think is the lie? And we'll go around the room. And then we have this thing called the big reveal, which is where Eliza then is asked to give us the actual lie that she told. And then we, congratulate one another that we were all able to guess or whatnot. Then we do breathing exercises. We're all standing in a circle. At that point, everybody has arrived. We now stand up. We're standing in a circle. We do breathing exercises. We do voice exercises. We practice our vocal cords. We do rising and falling inflection. We blow out and see how long we can sustain a sound like ah, or we whistle, or we hum. We do all kinds of vocal exercises, again, to show that we have more than one way to express ourselves, And then at a certain point, we sit, and then we start to do more games. And sometimes the games are what I call solo, or duet, or full group. Like a solo thing might be like I'll hand someone a piece of paper. Actually, what I do is I take off an imaginary hat, I hold it in front of them, and I say, reach into my hat. So they have to go like this. And they take nothing, but I say, okay, unfold that paper, read what it says, fold it back and put it back in my hat. And now I say, okay, get up and do what it said. So it's completely spontaneous. It's completely improvised. There's no hat, there's no paper, but they have to go do something now without words. And now we have to guess what they're doing. Okay. Yeah, so we play games like that, and it leaves, then we have time for like, what did they just do? Did they do it well? That sort of thing. And we talk about communication. We have duets where we have two people getting up and we'll define them. We'll say, okay, so Jim and Karen, you guys are up next. And I'll say to the group, how are they related? Somebody say, well, they're boyfriend and girlfriend. Or someone will say they're best friends. Okay, fine. And what are they arguing about? And then we let it go at that. But before they start, we have to say, in a story, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yes. In the beginning, you have to say something about the two of you, and so it establishes that you're friends. Then in the middle, there's an argument. I don't want to go to that movie. I want to do this instead. And then at the end of the story, there's a resolution. So we try to keep it short. But at the same time, we're working out like we're working out the dialogue that's all being improvised. They have a certain structure that they have to have a beginning, then they have to have a conflict, then they have to have a resolution. That's a duet. A full group would be like we tell stories, once upon a time, and each person who takes a turn in that story, they have to get up and act it out. That one sentence at a time, they act it out, then they sit. The second person who's up has to do the first sentence plus their own. Then the third person do two sentences, then their own. It's fun. It's just fun.
It sounds delightful, and I really appreciate that the way you're describing it. As I'm envisioning it in my head, listening to you, it's a real combination of so many different types of communication. Without being afraid of establishing that there are rules towards, that lead towards effective communication, where you really are trying to get a point across to to either one other person or a group of people, or tell a story or be engaging and also gain something out of it. But it's not, I think the reinforcing thing that I just want to say, because we have to end in just a minute, is clearly what you're talking about is not only the sort of very traditional type of communication that so many of us were taught and sort of expected to engage in, that this is really about also learning, how to use your body, how to use your gestures, how to use your facial expressions, and how to not just be the person who's communicating in those ways, but to be the receiver of that type of communication.
That's right.
Which so many people with all different types of challenges, whether diagnosed or not diagnosed, or just the way, we all individually prefer to communicate, will benefit from this. So it sounds like tremendous fun. I also want to just thank you and recognize the fact that you, just in recent months, now have the chance to teach undergraduate students how to employ what you've put into place here, because you've hit on something pretty special, and now you're going to have the chance to have more young professionals coming out of school with the ability and the desire and experience to do this, which broader impact.
And what I also like about the class that I'm teaching is that it's interdisciplinary. It's not just for speech people. That's why it's a liberal arts class, so it's open to special ed, regular ed, psychology students, social workers, phys ed teachers. It's open to all people who are at some point in their careers going to be working with the special needs population,
Absolutely. And honestly, the implications are even beyond that at some point. I mean, we hear about, Fortune 500 companies and managers and CEOs.
That's right.
Benefit from this type of practice, I think, with,
we've all played those trust games, like where you stand and I trust that you'll catch me when I fall off the chair. Yeah, sure.
Bob, thank you so much. Is there any place that we can direct our listeners to learn more about your classes or you, or where they can get more information and keep track of what you're doing?
Well, I'm of a certain age that I am not a social media dude. And I feel, more and more I'm learning that I should become that guy. I've always thought that with Instagram, I had to take a picture of my food, and I'm not into that. So that being said, I guess the best place for the time being, until I start to establish something more that they can look into, is just to email me.
Okay.
And you have my email right there. It's robert.domingo@liu.edu.
Okay. Well, you just said it, and we'll also put that out there when we share this interview. We'll make sure it's in the little summary, so people have a way of getting in touch with you.
When will that be?
It's gonna air soon, probably in the next week or two, and you'll get notified before it goes out, and then we'll send you a link as well. So we hope that you will share it far and wide.
Oh, I sure will.
It'll air on several local radio stations around us, as well as be on our website and various podcast apps where people can find us and follow us.
Is this the sort of thing that if I were to contact a local college radio station, they might be able to play it?
We would love for them to do that. That would be great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they could just get in touch with us.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Bob Domingo, thank you so much for talking to us about improv and how you're using it with the autistic and population, as well as so many others. And now starting in this next piece of writing your workbook and teaching undergraduate students to do the same.
Yes.
It's really awesome and inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate you.
You're very welcome. This is 1 in 36, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, and remember, Anderson cares.
You've been listening to 1 in 36, a weekly presentation from Anderson Center for Autism, celebrating their centennial in 2024. Join them for another edition of the show next weekend.